Okay, let us get going. Well, thank you all so much for coming this evening. We're now going to have a quick panel on all the fine speakers we had tonight. Justina, Vuk, Evgeny, and Yondon. I'd like to start with Justina. We have been making so much progress in web3 and really advancing the state of the art, yet there's still obviously a gap. Beyond just the stuff that all of you are working on, what do you think the biggest thing holding us back is?
I think there are a few things here, really. I'll try to make my answer as short as I can, but I think one of them is that in general, like tech has to improve. It doesn't really apply to ceramics specifically, but in general, applications that are being built in Web3 right now, I think I mentioned that in my talk as well, that most of the things that I've seen so far are really good in terms of financial standpoint. It's great, like there are so many opportunities from DeFi and all of that stuff. But then when it comes to making that leap to build applications that are more user-centric, that have lots of features and so on, we are really not there yet. And the key reason, at least in my opinion, is because we don't really have good solutions just yet to how data can be stored, how we can do the computing and things like that. So I think all of these projects that were giving talks today, I think they're great examples of how many exciting things are happening. And I think the future looks really exciting, but I think we really have to make that shift. And another one, which I think is overall really interesting idea, is that a lot of times we speak about what kind of things we have in Web 2 and how we can make the same thing in Web 3. I was at DEF CON a few weeks ago, and it was actually a talk from Livepeer that I heard, and they mentioned a really interesting idea about that, and they said that the real breakthrough will happen when someone will build an app that is not only better than what we have in Web 2, but that doesn't even exist in Web 2. So I think we really have to keep thinking bigger, and instead of just trying to replicate what we have in Web 2, which is obviously great, we really have to think what's beyond that, what Web 3 can really give us in terms of applications, user experience, and things like that.
Cool. Vuk, kind of extending the answer, like in infrastructure, is there an opportunity to extend beyond Web 2 to something truly transformative?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things here. So one is definitely having infrastructure that is at least 30 times cheaper than with centralized cloud providers. And the reason for that is that AWS and big tech companies are just greedy. Like there is no reason for them to keep prices that high. And of course, like they are basically building monopolies on top of like the users. They were using other services. They just sold VMs for much more higher prices. But on the other hand, like I think what's holding us back is the fact that we are really not collaborating enough. If you think about what happened in Ethereum, most of yeah, sound is better. Most of the innovation came from the fact that you had different smart contracts interacting between each other. And if you look at computing and what we're doing today, we are really not doing that. We have a bunch of computing networks all doing one particular thing, which cannot by itself be better than what cloud providers provide. But if we combine multiple networks and we have workloads interacting between each other, then we can actually do things that were not possible before. Imagine having a Zoom application that is decentralized and then having the ability to have a bunch of filters that are built by an open network where you have a marketplace where people can actually decide what kind of filters they want. Maybe that is a super smart way of like removing your background. Maybe it's a way for augmenting your background on what people are talking about in that particular Zoom call. So those are things that are not possible today, and opening up the market both for developers that can build those backgrounds and filters, but also for compute providers that can run those and earn money for doing those, and then reducing further the cost by 30x. That's something that definitely is not possible today.
That's great. So, Yondon, not to put you on the spot, but Justina mentioned that you were already looking beyond this. Vuk mentioned that there are already a lot of monopolies out there. Why are people buying into it? Why are people going and buying on AWS versus taking a choice on something that is decentralized? Is it just missing pieces, or is it something else?
So, great question. I think a big reason is in the status quo and in the status quo of development. It's just really convenient, and it's really convenient to default to known quantities, and AWS and cloud service providers are known quantities. And I think that is a hurdle that can eventually be surmounted by a lot of the infrastructure that's being built in this space. However, kind of coming back to the first question that you had around kind of what is the gap that exists and why aren't we seeing more application development on this infrastructure? On one hand, I think it is important to make the tech quote unquote ready, and it's really important for infrastructure builders to continue pressing forward there. At the same time, I think it's important for infrastructure builders to work hand in hand with app developers even when that's not the case, and work with the app developers that are especially taking alternate approaches, sort of to what you were alluding to before, where like we definitely lead better versions of the Web 2 applications that we already have today. However, I think there's a huge opportunity to take a different route initially as well and identify what Web 3 and crypto actually can uniquely enable. And because it's unique and fundamentally cannot be achieved with Web 2 applications, there is room for there to be a gap on the infrastructure level. And then that allows the applications to actually drive the roadmap of the infrastructure, because the applications are demonstrating, oh, this is a clear use case, and this is clearly something that infrastructure and Web 2 cannot do. So it makes total sense for you to improve on it. I won't take too long on this, but the one example that I really like is some of the stuff that we've seen in the Ethereum ecosystem with this game called Dark Forest that some people might be familiar with. But it's this real-time strategy game where, without even getting into the internals, it's based on like zero-knowledge proofs. But when they first launched it, people thought they were crazy, because they were just like, Ethereum can't scale today, and you want to do this on Ethereum? And they were like, well, we're going to try it. And what was cool was the game was unique enough such that people were willing to go through some of the hurdles that were there at the time in order to continue playing that game, and that actually helped accelerate a lot of the R&D in the right areas in order to make that game more sustainable. And 3 years later, it's still going. And is it at the scale that we want it to be at? Not quite yet, but I think it's a great example of how if you take this alternate path and really focus on what's uniquely enabled in Web3, you still want to support the other use cases, but this is a way to have the applications drive the infrastructure progress a little bit more.
Fair enough. Evgeny, you're like out there building the entire thing, and then, you know, there's some realities of physics, right? Speed of light, decentralized compute, things like that. Will we ever have a one-to-one match with infrastructure from Web 2? Do we need one?
Well, I think it's also a good question. I think some of these pieces definitely we just need better, you know, like evolution of them in Web3 space. Some of these pieces just will. Well, I think a lot of this it depends on the scale. Like, right, conceptually, things like I want to run some code on some infrastructure that magically runs and magically scales. I don't want to think about how it works under the hood. Like, the need for it exists in Web 2 space and the Web 3 space, but the need in very particular solution, like how this exactly achieved and what is the software framework that allows me to get these capabilities, there's going to be like some different solutions in Web 3 than it was on Web 2. So I'd say, like, I mean, at some point we will get to the place where we will have quite enough infrastructure to build proper applications that competitive with Web 2 applications. But in many areas we are not there yet. And, you know, as guys rightfully said, that we need to try to really work really tight with application developers to build those infrastructure and enable those exact use cases that help them today, so they can today onboard more users and drive more demand for the infrastructure. So it's like chicken and egg, but like we need to solve this puzzle.
So let's shift a little bit. Instead of looking at all our gaps, what are the things that we do uniquely well? Justina, what do you, when you see people coming and using ceramic at like scale or saying, oh, I'm ditching my old thing because it doesn't offer what you offer, what do you lean into there? Or what apps have you seen that really set a new bar?
I think, okay, sorry. Yeah, so in general, I think the best thing about building on Web3 is the scale and building in the open. Like that's the main reason as well why I'm such a big fan of open source, because not only you share what you are working on, but you get ideas from so many different developers, teams that are working on the same problems, and you kind of you have that like togetherness in terms of working and building on top of things and sharing that. So I definitely see that, and I'm such a big fan of that. And also communities that surround every single project in Web3 is amazing. I love that part. Now, specifically about, let's say, ceramic and things, one of the key two use cases that we see right now is Web3 social. That is definitely one of the top use cases that we see, and here are the, I would say, two key reasons why we have teams like, for example, Orbis. If anyone in the audience heard of them, they're a really great project, and they basically allow users to own their data first of all, and that's the biggest advantage and difference from what we have in Web 2, because social media is so powerful, it's amazing. And now with things like a single sign-on, you open up even more opportunities for big companies like Google, for example, or Facebook, collect your data in so many different areas. So by building on Web3, you allow users to make sure that their data is not stored on these like fragmented, centralized places. And then at the same time, the same composability and building in the open with other developers, the same data models, they are being improved by other developers, so they can make improvements faster and develop much faster. And then another one, I mentioned that in my talk as well, DAO tools as well. They are looking into how verifiable credentials could be stored in a more secure way on Web3, and how they can build necessary tooling for DAO. So this is something that we still see growing, but it's definitely a lot of interest from that end. So yeah.
Cool. Vuk, kind of taking it from the other side, those are great. You've obviously built some enormous partnerships and worked with people behind the scenes, a little bit like what Evgeny said, like how do we bring partners to market in the same way that Justina's bringing users to market? What do you see as the pull through there? Why are partners signing up for Web3? What's pulling them in?
Yeah, I think it's generally because for the first time we are able to coordinate big like plots of people, and we finally have the ability to have particular actors focus on only one particular activity and have everyone focused on their parts, and together as a society we can coordinate in solving like larger problems. This is really not possible today, because like if you want to do anything in terms of like computing, you always need to create some cloud account, you need to have a company, the company needs to be like invoiced by that particular organization selling you that service and so on, but you don't have ways of like maybe pulling together resources in order to have a solution for a particular cause. For example, you could imagine having compute providers focus on solving like a particular disease, because that's something important for a particular community, and then you could have like other communities basically staking funds or investing in that particular pool, and having an incentive for particular compute providers to like execute compute jobs that actually help discovering cures for that particular disease. That was never possible before, and I think that's just the beginning of like a much wider like coordination coordination infrastructure that we need as society, especially in such turbulent times.
Yeah. Yondon, when you, to extend what Vuk was just mentioning about collaboration, and Justina as well, actually, how do you see, like, organization happening, particularly around common problems that we need to solve? In a lot of ways, you're, like, working on a very common problem, transcoding, and decoding and things like that. What components should we be collaborating with, and what components should we be differentiating with? Where is the line in Web3, and especially in the area of coordination where it's very hard to do, what do you think the right path is for us?
So for collaboration, I think just using our domain as an example, we spend a lot of time thinking obviously about video, but generally about how media content is handled and all the different computing infrastructure that's required in that. And I think that gives us a fairly unique insight into like some very domain-specific problems there. But if you zoom out and you forget about the fact that we're dealing with video and media, it can be very easy to just say that, oh, this is a distributed computing project. And because it's distributed computing, we can take a general framework and have that apply to any form of compute that you try to do. And I think that's the holy grail, right? Like, of course, we would all love to see that happen, but I think that is also theoretical and a little bit removed from the reality and practical reality that we have today. And while that might be a worthwhile thing to work towards, I think that is a gap and like chasm that I think is worthwhile bridging on the collaboration front, where it's like taking, like using us as an example, the time that we've spent kind of looking deep in this domain about like what is specifically quirky and weird about some of the work that we're doing here that makes it a little bit different from other types of distributed computing projects. I think having that insight being brought to the table and making that clear and having these conversations with people can be useful, because then it helps other people understand some of the intricacies and idiosyncratic elements of like these different domains. So I think that's an area where greater collaboration can help with. And then on the differentiate front, I'll keep it short. I think differentiation should be around, like once again, going back to that specific domain, like it's great to collaborate on these like shared technical problems, but at the end of the day, I think each of us also need to remain laser focused on like our users and that specific needs that they have. So to the extent that we should be collaborating, I think we should always be thinking about, will the fruits of this collaboration better equip us to serve the users that we think are underserved right now? And then that is the area for us to differentiate in. I think that's how I think about it.
Makes sense. Evgeny, I'll ask one more question, then I'll open it up to the audience. You just raised a round. Congratulations. When you think about what investors are looking for in the space, you've heard a bunch of different ideas here, differentiation, extension, things like that. When you went through your process, what were they most looking for you to talk about? What did they want to hear that other people can lean into?
Well, I mean, investors in crypto space, they believe a lot in crypto in general, in tokenized markets, right? So a lot of investors look at different areas and see, if there is a way to create the token-based economy, that let's say, for example, a lot of these examples are marketplaces like Livepeer or like Fluence. Like basically, we all do some sort of marketplaces. We have providers and we have customers, and then we connect them and we create the value. And the token basically allows to subsidize this the bootstrapping of this market, or like put additional rewards to providers or put additional rewards to the customers, and basically the enable higher efficiency than, it's obvious things, but instead of Uber, we have decentralized Uber. Because we eliminate the company, we can have lower margins, and we can power the whole economy with the token. So investors look at such areas where this model just makes sense. And if it makes sense in your area, then it's a good opportunity to really like replace the the big tech with their current monopolies via thin, or like, well, you can call it thin or fat protocols, depends on the definition, but like the fat, let's say fat protocols with thin margins that because of efficiency gonna distribute the value directly to whoever contributes to this protocol.
Great. I've been doing all the talking up here. Anyone in the audience have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So we'll take you back in time to 2007. And what came in, what allowed actually the whole evolution of web 2 is the thing you're holding in the hand. Yes. What, in your opinion, should came along on the market to allow the evolution of web 3?
So I'll repeat the question, and then I'll toss it open to anyone who wants to answer. This transformed Web 1 to Web 2, arguably. What is the device? What is the thing that will unlock the evolution of Web 3? Did I capture your question right? Yeah. Okay. Who wants to answer?
Yeah, I would say like probably, I mean, how you should think about Web3, like the first use cases are going to be like the super slow, super cheap computing workloads. And if you think about, because that's where you can actually provide 20, 30x improvement over decentralized providers. So if you think what are those workloads, most likely that's going to be machine learning, maybe it's going to be inference. That's a use case where you can imagine a bunch of traction. Probably it's going to be a bunch of things around data processing and so on. Those are not as sexy as having an iPhone actually through an application calling a backend, but those are very different problems. And those are the kind of problems that we have today. Maybe what you're going to also see is probably protein folding and things like that that were basically impossible to incentivize. Maybe those now are becoming possible to incentivize, and you can see governments actually investing funds into really trying to solve those problems. But anything that is high compute needs to be super cheap, and when you get to a tremendous scale, you can see tremendous results.
Anyone else like to take a shot as well? Okay. I don't know, super bright out here. Anyone else have a question? Anyone? Okay. So, actually, Vuk, I want to open it up to whoever would like to answer this, but really extending that. Where's the pivot point? Where is it to, like, when you think about going beyond either what is possible in Web 2 or not convenient in Web 2, from a scale perspective, what do you think that is?
Yeah, I think we are generally in a stupid situation where we have like a coordination problem. Like all the tools are there, but we have no coordination between the different projects. So for example, Fluence has a great tech stack, but very few nodes are right now running Fluence because they focus on building the tech rather than focusing just on pure token economics. Then you have like Filecoin that has a great tech stack for high-val. IPFS is still not incentivized, so like it's super hard to actually have like that layer that is required for Fluence jobs to actually be able to run Fluence workloads. And then you also need to have like the separate layer of dev tools that are basically using Fluence technology combined with IPFS, combined with Filecoin, combined with a compute layer that is actually going to run the entire thing. Yeah, we have so many layers of complexity to just get to an executed job. So generally what my opinion is, and this is of course the reason why we started working on the resource layer, is that we need to have a global incentive that basically allows infrastructure providers to run all of those networks on the same machines, and in that way being able to have like multiple workloads interacting between each other. Because we might not be able to incentivize someone running IPFS at this point, but we might incentivize that someone running IPFS if that is required to get a reward that is also like incentivizing the compute networks.
Yondon, you actually have an interesting problem, or not an interesting problem, just a different angle at it, right? It's not going to be a massive workload for you because ultimately you're serving users, and viewing the video at the end of the day. What's the pivot point for you? How does it get to scale such that yours becomes the default or the better solution? More nodes, more people, more videos, anything in particular?
So I think the way that I think about it right now is that in the medium and long term, I do think that cost and the magnitude cost differential that Vuk mentioned is going to be a huge differentiator. However, until we get to that point, I think in the shorter term, where I actually see the pivot and where I actually see the biggest differentiation is what I talked about before, having this infrastructure by virtue of it being permissionless and people being able to build on it without anyone's kind of guidance or permission, leveraging that property in order to build things that might feel a little bit even unhinged or a little bit strange at first, but those being the applications that really demonstrate new media formats that aren't possible today. So think about how TikTok introduced a new media format. I think there's an opportunity in crypto and Web3 to leverage some of the unique value propositions of crypto around attribution, dynamic and automated value distribution to create new media formats centered around things such as community co-creation. I think one of the most interesting things that infrastructure can enable by being permissionless and open is allowing communities to build on top of that, co-create media and content or new types of things, and then having that value attribution and distribution reward them. I think those types of formats are the things that if we as infrastructure builders at Livepeer can enable in the short term will be the big differentiation. And then once we layer on the cost differentiation as well, we'll demonstrate the true value of Web3 infrastructure for video relative to the status quo.
Yeah. Evgeny, when you think about, it's interesting because you have an interesting angle here. You're providing a complete platform, but you're below the things that end users and even maybe a lot of businesses are going to see. When you think about services that infrastructure providers can pull together that empower the people building on them to be truly advanced and implement some of the things that Yondon said, like truly creative things, what do you think some of those are?
Does it work? Oh, it works. I mean, this is just something, it's super hard to answer, because we have the whole community here that explore in different kinds of, use cases and experiences, like thinking of the new types of business models, new types of content, new types of, applications combined with different types of data. And we constantly, as a growing Web3 community, we are experimenting by applying the things to each other and see whatever works. And sometimes it's just random things work you cannot even imagine. So I guess in terms of combining different infrastructure pieces together, it's also not super clear how the future gonna look like. And I think what's important here is we just have to keep experimenting. We just have to keep trying to combine pieces together, try to collaborating, and see whatever really gets traction, whatever works for the user, whoever user is, whether it is a developer, whether it is a small or medium business enterprise, consumer, mobile users, web users, it's just so many layers here and huge space of experimentation. Just quick example of Ethereum had this vision of, that financial application is going to be built and the token is going to be built. But there are also, if you remember, 2015 or 2016 and 17, there was a lot of conversations about use cases of Ethereum much outside of fintech, all these smart locks, I can send transaction to open the door, which still makes sense. All these ideas are great, but we saw traction in the DeFi DAOs and NFTs, which were super unclear at the moment. So I think in terms of Web3 and infrastructure, we can expect something like that.
Fair enough.
That somewhere we where we not expect like something can happen.
Justina, I'll give you the last question. What, to extend Evgeny's point, what experiments, what new things have you seen that give you the most hope for the future, and the things that get you really excited about, what's coming next?
I think probably the key thing that right now makes me really excited is overall decentralized science and machine learning space, which for me, when I started working in Web3 about 7 months ago, actually not that long ago, was one of my biggest questions and doubts, like, I'm leaving Web 2 and I did all this data ML kind of work, and like what's happening in Web 3, and I thought there is not much happening, but actually there is a lot. It's a really growing space, and the people are asking really, really great questions from how funding can be done better for research, and how Web 3 can enable that, so that research is not locked and not like managed by some specific companies that can fund specific projects. To how can we do machine learning and all of this computation better in a more scalable and faster way as well. So like all of these projects that I see around Web3 data that are popping up, and that's one of the reasons why I'm part of Ceramic team, is because they are part of that ecosystem as well. I really hope that they will open up more opportunities for data to be more open, more shared, and also the same about all of these amazing projects that are working on these really hard computational problems, and really open up the network for some really great and interesting things. So I'm super excited about that. And throughout this week, last week here in Lisbon, I had so many interesting conversations with projects that are focused specifically on AI and machine learning in Web3. So yeah, this field is really growing, and I'm super excited about that.
Terrific. Well, thank you all so much for coming up and giving your thoughts.